You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world tonight. This is an unscheduled broadcast, an urgent unscheduled broadcast. The state of the world right now is very grim. We're looking at some things happening in real time before our eyes that are edging us ever closer to, well, the end of days, if you want to look at it from the biblical perspective. We're seeing things happening in real time that I never would have expected to see in my lifetime, but certainly we can be assured that what we're looking at right now has been pre-planned for a very long time, and we're going to get into that tonight. And who are the people behind some of this? We're going to look tonight at a subject I'm calling Weaponized Rhetoric, NGOs, Wars, and Rumors of Wars. You may have heard that over the course of the past several hours, or actually more than several hours, several days now, over the course of the weekend here that we're experiencing right now, we have seen that Israel just outright attacked Iran, and they called it a preemptive strike and claim that they have the right to defend themselves. And where does this idea come from? Well, as everything else, much of this policy comes from non-governmental organizations and think tank groups. They're the ones that call the shots on these policies and action plans, and we're going to lay it down here tonight, where this comes from, why it is they're doing what they're doing, and how they justify their position through the use of a little tool that has been long forgotten in the modern world called rhetoric. Now, this is of the utmost importance in understanding these things. They want to position themselves in a way wherein it sounds like they are the victims here. And who are they? I'm not necessarily speaking of the Israeli people or any people group in particular at this point. The thing is, these people, they want to utilize all of these different facets of culture and weaponize them in the form of ideas to affect the minds of others. And that is what we see. It's all a dehumanizing process that allows agendas to be unleashed upon the world with ulterior motives from what they claim, and have justification to do so. And it lines up with a lot of preconceived ideas from people in the Western world. And we'll see how all this plays together tonight as we look into a little something, a non-governmental organization called the Israel Project. And we'll see that much of what's been happening, what's been presented in media, especially social media, through the course of the past decade or so, has all been contrived by this non-governmental organization. They've kind of steered the conversation, they've laid down the groundwork, and they've weaponized language in order to justify what it is they're doing right now. This is their last resort, according to themselves. And we'll get into that tonight because we're going to read a little something from the Israel Project. And this little something we're going to read from is a document titled The Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary. This is wherein they've come up with a strategy to weaponize terminology, to weaponize rhetoric, words spoken, and the way they can position themselves through the use of social media to get things done, to achieve the goals they want, to position themselves in a positive light for the Western world. And this all comes from this non-governmental organization, NGO. If you're not familiar with the term NGO, get familiar with it. These are the people who really set policy in this world and back political leanings within the auspices of governments and governmental organizations. They have a lot of influence and power and sway, as we'll see here, and much of what they do is done through the use of the tool called rhetoric. Like I said, a long-forgotten term to much of Western culture, but an important one nonetheless, and the elites of this world, they send their children to schools that teach them logic and rhetoric and all of the other basic tenets of a classical education that we lack in our education system today in the public domain. So they teach this stuff to the ruling class of this world, and the rest of us are woefully ignorant of it for the most part. But rhetoric is a very useful tool. Now, what is rhetoric, you may ask? Let's define rhetoric right now, and we'll see what it is. This is from the dictionary here, the Oxford Dictionary. Rhetoric: the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the use of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. So now you know the dictionary definition of rhetoric. And then you can understand a few things once you understand this. They've weaponized the very language against us. We know this. We've talked about this ad nauseum on this broadcast for a long, long time now. Sounds like is like. The use of words, the tinkering with definitions, the etymology of words. It's a type of spellcraft, if you will. Broadcasting. You see how they've weaponized the language? This is a form of rhetoric, the weaponization of language. And this Israel project has done so with this 2009 document we'll be reading directly from, and you may be shocked at some of the things you hear coming from this document. But first, let's get a little bit more into the background and the history of what the Israel Project is. The Israel Project was a U.S.-based nonprofit, non-governmental organization. According to the Israel Project, it was not affiliated with any government. However, according to its website, it had a team with decades of experience in media, government, policy institutes, research, academia, and the military. The Israel Project had offices in the United States and Israel, and regularly hosted press briefings featuring Israeli spokespeople and analysts. According to the Israel Project, its extensive Arabic media program had 1.2 million Arabic-speaking subscribers on their Facebook page, which was called Israel Uncensored. Despite the success, a new Israel Project management team in 2014 decided to drop the Arabic program, which became independently known as Al-Masdar, subsequently closing in April of 2019. A little bit more of the history of the Israel Project. And this is important to lay down the groundwork so you understand what's been done here and how we've arrived in this situation we've arrived at today. The Israel Project was founded by Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, Margot Wolfson, and Cheryl Schwartz in 2003. Mizrahi served as its president until 2012 when Josh Block took over as CEO and president. Initially started to change U.S. and European perceptions of Israel, it had worked in English, French, German, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese to reach a global audience. However, from the end of 2012, the Israel Project decided to shut down its Global Affairs unit to focus more on social media outreach and perceptions in both the U.S. and Israel. As of late 2016, its board of advisors included 36 Democratic and Republican members of the United States House of Representatives and United States Senate. Going to pause for a moment. So we have members of Congress on the board of advisors for this NGO, this non-governmental organization. Doesn't that sound like a conflict of interests? I would say it does. This is supposed to be a non-governmental organization that, according to themselves, had no ties to any particular government, but here they are, with members of the United States government right from Congress as board members thereof. The Israel Project operated offices in Washington, D.C. and Jerusalem. The Israel Project was the first Jewish or pro-Israel group to host Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad in the United States. In July of 2019, Haaretz reported that the Israel Project could soon cease to exist due to a funding crisis. A month later, its offices in both Jerusalem and Washington were closed, with Vice President Lion Weintraub citing polarization among Zionists as the reason. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. So this organization closed up shop in 2019. For what reason? Well, they claim a lack of funding. Somehow I doubt that's the case. I think they wanted to hush everything up and not show their hand, not show how much sway and influence they had, and perhaps they shifted operations to some other non-governmental organization or think tank group. But certainly they had already established some techniques that we're going to get into here later. So that being the case, they closed up shop in July of 2019. Or actually August, because that was in an interview they did in July. So August of 2019, just several months prior to the unleashing of the COVID scam on the world. Isn't it coincidental timing with all of this stuff? Always these coincidences in the timing of these things. So this group began to disappear out of the political sphere of influence at that time, at least on the surface. They went underground. Let's put it that way. A little more about the activities of this group. The Israel Project conducted polling and public opinion research with U.S. focus groups and advised Israeli experts and political leaders on the most effective factual ways to present their views to U.S. audiences. Quote, "We share our information with all the political leaders across the political spectrum because they're the ones being interviewed on television," end quote. The Israel Project also provided information to journalists by offering background material, press conferences, and one-on-one interviews with these experts and political figures such as Shimon Peres. The Israel Project has supplied information for thousands of news stories around the world as part of their pro-Israel media advocacy efforts. The Israel Project also bought commercial time to air pro-Israel advertising on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and other cable networks. According to the organization website, the Israel Project informs providing facts, access to experts, and keen analysis. It offers real-time background information, images, maps, audio, video, graphics, and direct access to newsmakers. The Israel Project organizes press briefings and speaker tours, conference calls, and educational trips, supports nonprofit journalism, conducts public affairs research, and adheres to the highest possible standards of accuracy and reliability. The Israel Project also distributes a daily newsletter, the Daily TIP, which provides updates and insights on events in the region. The Israel Project's president and CEO, Josh Block, a former official in the Clinton administration and spokesman for AIPAC, published an op-ed in 2016 critical of the quote-unquote increasingly isolationist wing of the Democratic Party, which he called the neo-progs, end quote. So I'm going to pause for a moment. So now you know a little bit more about this Israel Project, this non-governmental organization with members from government, past, present, and future, as board members, and its influence that it had. Well, when you look at what the Israel Project was doing, it was supplying information to the media for news stories. This is how you get things done. It's this organization that had all of the filters of what the public saw in the press to sway their opinion. And we'll see when we get into the actual document itself here tonight just how skewed all of this really is, and how rhetoric has been used to sway public opinion for the longest time. and how rhetoric has been weaponized to fulfill agendas by players in the big game here with ulterior motives. And we'll see what it is they have to say about how to approach these things. Now, this document we're reading from, this document, which is titled The Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary, and you can find this for free online. You could go to their website and find this. We're going to read a little something in here that I think is a little more than coincidental with the things going on right now in real time before our eyes. Here, kicked off on this weekend, which, by the way, on this weekend, other things going on, we have riots and protests going on in various nations around the world about illegal immigration, all simultaneously. And we have, for the first time in my memory that I can remember, we have a military parade going on the president's birthday here in America, which they also claim it's the 250th birthday of the Army, which is all well and good and fine, and that's the justification for doing this. But of course, this is going to agitate more of these protests, which seem to be funded by outside sources purposely. And you can't really look at all of this and say it's a coincidence that we have all of these protests and riots and violent things kicking off all around the world, not just here in the United States, all at the same time, simultaneously. And then also, not coincidentally, you have Israel preemptively attacking Iran to defend itself. Preemptive self-defense. I guess it's okay to attack somebody or harm somebody if you feel threatened by them, and you call it preemptive self-defense now. It seems a little disingenuous on the face of it, but this is one of the ways that they've used this idea of rhetoric in a weaponized fashion. So it's okay. They're the victims, you see. The ones that decided to strike in the middle of the night another sovereign nation. They call it self-defense, preemptive self-defense. And they get away with it. And I think there's a lot of people that are not happy with this situation. And don't get me wrong, the political climate in the Middle East has always been problematic. It is a powder keg waiting to go off. And I know the Israeli people themselves have been under threat for a long time by many of these terrorist organizations and things like that exist in that region. But the problem is a lot of it is a contrivance of the intelligence agencies. That's the big secret behind all of it. In order to get things done for the power players of this world, they let a lot of this stuff go on. They let the organization and formation of these types of cells of terrorist organizations happen. And a lot of it is instituted by intelligence agencies. You'll see in the mainstream news stories that it seems that Mossad has been embedded in Iran for quite a long time. They were there, and then you wonder how all of this goes down. How did they get there? How long have they been there? How long have they had their fingers in things? You have to ask the question, but they don't want you to question that. They just want you to look at the narrative that they've crafted for you. But at any rate, let's get right into this document. So you can see the ways in which language, rhetoric, has been weaponized against the masses to institute wars and rumors of wars, and how they've had their eyes on Iran for a very long time. And there's a lot of reasons for this, a lot of unspoken reasons. And one of the unspoken reasons is Iran, as of right now, is the only country left in the world without a central bank. I'm going to go there. You've heard this stuff before. So that's probably one of the main reasons behind the scenes that the banking cartels and interests want to get their foot in the door in this way. And all of this, like I said, has had a pre-planning phase to it for a long time. And that'll be directly outlined in this document. It's 2009 Global Language Dictionary from the Israel Project. So I'm going to start on page 37 of the document. And this was about attaching Hamas and Hezbollah as being backed by Iran in Gaza, where all of this kicked off. And one of the points they want to make for communication with the press and with social media is they need to be able to continually establish the connection between Iran and Iran-backed Hamas and Iran-backed Hezbollah. Doing so will help you continually remind the audience of the threat presented by Iran, a reminder they need, and the audience will be receptive to the connection, as shown on the next page of this document. And I'm going to pause before I proceed any further and let you know the history of this document. This document is labeled Property of the Israel Project, not for distribution or publication, copyright 2009. This was never intended to get out to the public, but it was leaked by somebody to Newsweek magazine. And that's how it got out there. So they never intended for you to see this. This is a non-government organization that put this together. They didn't want the public to know how they do things. But this is how they manipulate the masses, the public consciousness, through the use of rhetoric. So now, on the next page here, when we continue from that portion, that was a connection, connecting things going on in Gaza to Iran and making sure they get the point across that Iran is central to all of this because this is the nation sponsoring these terror groups that are at the heart of the problem. So therefore, Iran's at the heart of the problem. So the language, tackling a nuclear Iran. This is chapter 5 on page 39 of the document. And I'll put links to the document in the show description here. Americans and Europeans are aware that Iran's quest for nuclear weapons is a problem, but they are largely unaware of just how great and immediate a problem it really is. Americans have a president who is conducting YouTube diplomacy with Iran, sending holiday greetings and signaling to the world that Iran can be wooed out of its weapons. Going to pause for a moment. Remember, this was published in 2009. This is when Obama was president, and remember, during Obama's presidency, he airdropped $4 billion in cash, U.S. dollars, U.S. cash, into Iran. Do you remember that? Probably not. We have a very short attention span. $4 billion he airdropped to Iran. That was under Obama's watch. You could go back and look up those news stories. I don't remember what the exact reasoning was for this, or what the alleged justified reasoning was, but this did happen. Now, let's read on. Remember, this was published in 2009. Americans agree that President Ahmadinejad is dangerous. They agree that Iran must not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. But between their war weariness in the Middle East and under the diplomacy-heavy approach of President Obama, Americans are operating under a hazy understanding about how near Iran is to being able to strike. Israel is aware of the threat. Americans and Europeans are not. You need to be aware of this disconnect in how you craft your language. Going to pause for a moment. Remember, this is targeted primarily at media and public relations people within governments They're telling them how to speak, what words to use, what to say, how to use their tone of their rhetoric to position themselves in the best possible light. Keep that in mind. Continuing reading. And the scariest part is that if you try to convince them, most of them won't believe you. Among the American left and center-left and Europeans, the new Israeli administration's warnings about Iran sound uncomfortably too much like President Bush and his call for preemption in Iraq. Gonna pause for a moment. And remember, preemptive striking. It's preemptive self-defense. That's how they try to frame this. You see, they give themselves justification for doing things that wouldn't otherwise be accepted. And we saw this with everything that happened just after the events of 9/11 back in 2001, when we went into Iraq to eliminate the weapons of mass destruction that weren't really there, but we used that as justification to do so. This was one of the things that happened under Bush's watch. And of course, we know the rest along with that. You see, it's all about rhetoric. How do you frame this to justify your actions and cover up your ulterior motives? And that's what this policy think tank paper for this Israeli project was all about. Was all about promoting certain agendas and using the language to justify their actions. Rhetoric. Weaponized rhetoric. Let's continue reading. So it says, so we suggest a rhetorical approach that is likely to gain Israel some credibility in talking about Iran. This language might not reflect the urgency of the threat, but it's the only way to keep people on board in advance of Israel's action. Gonna pause for a moment here. So now, right here, this paper admits exactly what it is. It's weaponized rhetoric to justify in advance and keep people on board in advance of what Israel's actions are going to be. Now, let's continue. It says, the best approach to Iran, step by step. Here's the instructions, ladies and gentlemen, that were given by this non-governmental organization to governments of the world in how to act upon this perceived threat. Even if this rhetoric lags behind the reality of the situation, you still need to talk about Iran in terms of a methodical step-by-step process of increasing pressure as the threat increases. And the best phrase to achieve this objective is economic diplomacy. It has much more appeal across the political spectrum than simple sanctions. Or tariffs, if you want to use that word. The economic component appeals to Republicans, and the diplomacy component satisfies Democrats. Gonna pause for a moment. So do you see what they do? Now, I'm using this as an example. This goes on across the board. This isn't all just based upon Israel, okay? This is what the nature of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, is. They all have these various types of documents that they keep hidden from the masses that have instructions and marching orders for the politicians and the supporters of these things, of these secret agendas that they have. And they tell them how to do it and how to manipulate the masses to accept what it is that they want done. Now, in this document, periodically they have a little portion within the document where something is outlined in a box, and it says words that work, and it's telling you the exact language to use. And if you go through the media and look over the course of the past decade or more, you will find this exact language used in media to describe things that they've been leading up to here. Words that work. Quote, we need a careful, well-planned, step-by-step approach to Iran. That approach should emphasize economic diplomacy. We need to prove to Iran that having nuclear capabilities are unacceptable, but this gives them the chance to save face. If that fails, the next step after economic diplomacy is economic sanctions, end quote. Now, this is a step-by-step playbook that they have been using in regards to dealing with Iran. They want Iran to capitulate to what it is they want, their agendas, their ulterior motives, and Iran has failed to do so. Now, say what you will about Iran. I don't know a lot about the details of the government there. I know there are tyrannical things that happen there. I know there are terrorist organizations embedded there, and that they are, in fact, oftentimes funded by the Iranian government. But I also know that the bulk of the people are just like you and me. Same thing could be said about the people of Israel. The governments do not reflect the people, the citizenry thereof. And sadly enough, it's the citizenry thereof that is affected the most by all of these different things, and they don't care. The people running the show don't care. They want their agendas regardless of the cost to humanity, to the citizenry, to the people, the ones that are truly affected by it. They don't care about that. It's all about positioning for power. But let's read on. That was under instruction number 1. Now, instruction number 2, it says, appeal to the global interest in keeping Iran non-nuclear. An important emphasis for prevention in Iran is that the whole world stands to benefit from keeping Iran from obtaining the ability to strike with nuclear weapons. If the argument is just about protecting Israel, then the need for prevention is easily dismissed. That sounds more like Israel is just looking out for itself and its position as the most militarily powerful nation in the region. Gonna pause for a moment. And now they tell you the quiet part out loud. That's what it's about, but they want to position themselves as saying, well, Iran will be a threat to the world at large, not just Israel. And maybe there's some truth to that statement. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But you see how this has been weaponized. How they use rhetoric to shape public opinion. And that's what's been done. And these are direct instructions from the Israel Project to governments, particularly the governments of Israel and the United States, how to frame this stuff up so that the masses will accept it. Now there's another box here underneath that statement that says words that work. Here's another direct instruction. Quote, if Iran obtains a nuclear weapon, the whole world will be held hostage. Not just America and Israel either. Arab nations like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, which neighbor Iran, but oppose many of its policies, will be under threat too. Most importantly, however, Iran shares funding, training, and weapons with other extremists and terrorist groups, and we cannot allow them to give nuclear materials to terrorists who could hit us at home, end quote. And if you go back and you listen to a previous broadcast I just did talking about could this be Event 201 version 2.0, there is a threat outlined in that document I read from there, which is an official government document, that talks about some type of a terror attack on July the 4th of this year. And you could see how, politically, things are ripe for some such an event or narrative to be accepted by the people as being factual. So, are they setting up for something else big here, especially in America as well? And they'll have justification for action. They have their scapegoat already lined up. Just food for thought, people. I'm just telling you, because times are getting really interesting and the times are drawing short. So now's the time. Get your heart right with God. Do it now. Time's running short. Even if you do not believe in the things outlined in the Bible, what you need to understand is the controllers of this world are using it as a blueprint to do what they want to do and to usher in the changes they want to usher in. So even if you don't accept that may be what's going on, you need to read it and understand it anyway, because they may be using it as a blueprint, or it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy, but nonetheless, it is entirely true. The Bible and the things outlined therein are entirely true, and I would advise you, don't be a fool. Get your heart and your soul and your mind right with God now, because we're coming upon some very interesting times. We're seeing things unfold in real time before our eyes that just a few short years ago we would have never thought possible. But here we are. But enough for that side note. Let's get back to the document at hand here. So then it continues and it says, note also the use of Arab nations to marginalize Iran. Just as we recommend in the chapter about Hamas, there is immense value in isolating Iran's leadership as being out of step with Arab neighbors. Many Americans would be surprised to know that these nations are afraid of Iran, just like Israel. By surprising them, you open their minds to the rest of your message. The following passage works because it puts a global, ecumenical, multicultural face on the problem. Then it gives another box here that says, words that work. And this is quoted directly from Ambassador Saleh Meridor. Quote, if there is a nightmare for all of us, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Arabs, Israelis, Americans, it is the day that there will be this unsacred marriage between terror and nuclear, end quote. And then it says under this box, it says, in other words, quote, unquote, this is in quotation marks, we're all in this together. Have you heard that phrase before? You can't make this stuff up. It's right here in bold print. Bold print. On page 40 of this document. Then the next page, it goes on to point number 3. It says, advocate a policy of prevention, but justify it based on past experiences across the globe. Obviously, stay away from anything preemption-oriented. That brings up far too many bad associations with recent American foreign policy. But prevention is a proven winner. However, if you need to tie prevention into real memorable examples of where prevention could have made a difference, if you just say prevention and leave it in a vacuum, people will assume you're just using it as a cover for your real foreign policy objectives, and that may be the truth behind all of it. Let's put it that way. So now they're saying avoid preemption and use prevention. So we'll see how this preemption thing comes about later here. That's something they wanted to avoid for as long as possible. So now there's another block here that says words that work. And these are some of the important bits of the document, because this is where they're actually telling government organizations and media exactly what to say. It says in this words that work, when it comes to the pursuit of nuclear weapons by terrorist countries, prevention must be our central principle. We simply cannot risk finding out what happens if a state that sponsors terrorism obtains a nuclear weapon, and if they will share that technology with other terrorist organizations. If we have learned anything from the last 10 years, it is that we cannot afford to be caught by surprise. America was devastated by the surprise attacks of September 11th, and America is not alone. An Iranian-sponsored or assisted attack on Britain, Spain, or India would be many times more devastating. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. And there are protests happening simultaneously in Britain and Spain right now, and I think in India too. Interesting how those get mentioned right here in this box, isn't it? And how they're talking about an Iranian-sponsored or assisted attack there. Now keep this stuff in mind. We're going to continue reading in the little box here that's titled Words That Work. It says, in dealing with Iran, prevention is a better approach than acceptance. If it becomes clear that the last chance to prevent a nuclear strike is to militarily target nuclear facilities, then the attack will be justified. And I'm going to pause for a moment. That's what we're looking at right now. So they feel, in their opinion, that they need to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities because they feel that prevention is no longer the tactic or option that they can use. It would seem that Iran must be at the precipice once again, since it's been for the past 40 years, likewise, on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. But certainly this is what they've been lobbying for. So now we see that this is their last chance to prevent a nuclear strike by militarily targeting their nuclear facilities. This is how they justify their actions. Now let's read on. It says, notice how the military option only comes up at the end and is presented only as a last resort. This is so essential. Also note the importance of describing attacks as militarily target nuclear facilities. To Americans, Israel has no right or reason to attack Iran or kill Iranian civilians. But as a last resort, there is some support for directly and precisely targeting Iran's facilities for making nuclear weapons. Gonna pause for a moment, and that's how Western media is trying to frame this up. If you look at what's coming out of Israeli and U.S. media, they're claiming they struck nuclear facilities and military targets. They're not telling you about the civilian loss of life. They're not telling you about anything else that goes along with that. They're not telling you about the backlash either. They're showing you missile attacks in Tel Aviv and other things now as Iran retaliates. Did they not expect it? Of course they expected it. They knew it. You see, they've been trying to set this up for a long time. It's outlined right here. They told you in no uncertain terms. Now, point number 4 it makes here is remind listeners of specific examples of Iran's aggressive behavior. Europeans and Americans understand the fanatical nature of Iran's administration, but it doesn't hurt you one bit to remind them with specifics. In fact, it helps tremendously. And here's another section that says words that work. And this is quoted from Mark Regev. Quote, Israel is very concerned about the Iranian nuclear program, and for good reason. Iran's president openly talks about wiping Israel off the map. We see them racing ahead on nuclear enrichment so they can have enough fissile material to build a bomb. We see them working on their ballistic missiles. We only saw last week shooting a rocket to launch a so-called satellite into outer space and so forth. The Iranian nuclear program is a threat, not just to my country, but to the entire region, and it's incumbent upon us to do what needs to be done to keep them from proliferating, end quote. So now you see a few things. So now they're saying Iran, allegedly, I guess at this time in 2009, shot a rocket into orbit to put a satellite up there, and they see this as being attached to their nuclear program and their capabilities, and they don't want to let them get nuclear capabilities. They see it as being part of this prevention strategy, and Mark Regev says it's incumbent upon us to do what needs to be done to keep them from proliferating nuclear weapons. So, preemptive self-defense being justified here in this document. And remember, this document was never intended for the public to see. Let's read on. It's point number 5. It says, personalize the problem for the American audience. Just as the language drawing parallels between American and Israeli values, rights, and democracy is a proven winner, you should also outline an equivalency between each government's responsibility to protect its people. This language comes from a television ad that worked very well. It helps Americans identify with the problem and paints a picture of the ties between the threats facing Israel. Importantly, the final message of a peaceful resolution appeals to everyone. And here's another box that says words that work, and this is from a TV ad paid for and produced by the Israel Project and put on television, and people probably saw it. And it says, quote, "Imagine Washington, D.C. under missile attack from nearby Baltimore. Since 2005, Israel has been targeted by 8,000 rocket and missile attacks from Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran has helped fund, train, and arm these terrorist groups. A nuclear Iran is a threat to peace, emboldens extremists, and could give nuclear material to terrorists with the ability to strike anywhere. The world's leaders can peacefully prevent a nuclear Iran. The time to act is now." End quote. That was a TV ad put out by the Israel Project way back in 2009. Let's move on to point number 6 here. It says, use a successful example from recent history to justify economic diplomacy. Just as Israel needs to highlight examples of how it achieved peace in the past, Israeli spokespeople need to use examples of how sanctions, but call it economic diplomacy, have worked in the past as proof that they can work now. And here's another box that said, words that work. It says, quote, "A combination of economic diplomacy and sanctions worked with Libya. They stopped their support for terror and their nuclear program, and now the world is safer. It is time to use this proven method with Iran so that we can stop their terror and nuclear program without war and bloodshed." End quote. And look how well that worked in Libya, right? And they went and they killed Gaddafi. And then they installed their new government that they wanted there. So they use this whole narrative that we'll try doing sanctions and economic things and diplomacy and this and that. And then when they still don't achieve the goals they want to achieve, if they still can't bend that nation or organization to their will, then they'll use military force to get it done. And they'll justify that action. Here's point number 7. Let's move on. I want to get through the rest of these points in this chapter of this Israel project, this Israel project, this document we're reading from. It says, point number 7, do not compare Iran to Nazi Germany. This is important, even though the situation is eerily similar. The world simply does not buy it. Worse yet, they feel it is over the top and undermines your credibility. Gonna pause for a moment. So I haven't heard anybody speak of Iran as being anything like the Nazis. But of course you hear that rhetoric everywhere else, don't you? Especially as it pertains to things going on here in the West. So now they have a box here that says words that do not work. Let's read what it says here. It says, quote, "What Iran is doing today is akin to what Hitler did in the years 1938 and 39. The difference, however, is that Hitler started a war and then tried to build nuclear weapons. Iran is working on the nuclear weapons first, but its goals are no less dangerous. Don't we wish today that people had stopped Hitler in 1939? End quote. Gotta pause for a moment. So now they're acknowledging, hey, don't say something like this because people will think you're ridiculous and you're disingenuous. See, they know how to use words in a weaponized fashion. They know how to use rhetoric. Point number 8 here. It says, again, absolutely no absolutes allowed. It says right-leaning voters loved the passage below. Left-leaning voters hated it. Why? It's too absolute. And I'm going to pause for a moment before we read from this box, which once again is labeled words that do not work, to point out the political environment that we are in right now, where it's talking about how right-leaning voters loved this passage. Well, it seems that maybe right now the time is right politically for them to appeal primarily to the right-leaning voters. And that's what we see going on here in America. And I think that maybe they're going against this now, because in the past it would not have worked, but now, since they've unleashed the extreme progressive leftist ideologies and woke ideologies on Western culture, there's a pushback now from the political right. So now they may be trying to appeal harder to the political right, and they may actually use this type of language and rhetoric to get it done, even though they had advised against it in 2009 in this document. So let's read this box, and you can formulate your own conclusions based on this. Words that do not work. Quote, I think we have to do everything in our power to prevent the arming of Iran with nuclear weapons, and I have to say, there is absolute unanimity in this regard. There is no opposition. There is no coalition, not only on the declaratory level, but on every other level. There are no party lines on this, and there are no party divisions on this. I cooperate with the Prime Minister, President, with anybody. I think this is a growing consensus, end quote. So now you can see they're using this absolute statement. And they've advised against this, but absolutes are what a lot of people in the political climate we have today are looking for. They want to feel that type of resolution or commitment from their governments that they cannot tolerate any of this threat any longer, and they need to do something about it. So this is appealing to this sense of imminent danger within people. Fear, of course. Always have to use fear to rationalize things, don't you? Well, if we let Iran get nuclear weapons, we're all going to be in danger. So therefore, we need to do something about it before they do, because we can't just sit back idle, because look what happened on 9/11. You see how they use this stuff to justify these things, even though it doesn't make a lick of sense to anybody that looks into it at any level? It's all about appeasing the public mindset. It's all about this weaponization of rhetoric to shape public opinion, and most people will not investigate anything for themselves. They just listen to what the television or the social media platform tells them, and they accept it as truth. And whatever political leanings they have tailor-made messaging based upon their political beliefs that allows them to accept these things and maybe accept different types of alternatives to these things and have a different viewpoint on them. And what it does is it instigates. It agitates. It works as a type of agitation propaganda. Agitprop. So if your political leanings are more left-wing than right-wing, you'll be triggered by things like a military parade today in Washington, D.C. Well, immigration protests and riots are going on and cities are burning. And there's outright war between Israel and Iran going on. And there's war in Ukraine, and there's war in Gaza. We have all this unrest. And the rhetoric will be weaponized in this way against the political left. While this is going on, Trump thinks it's more important to have a parade for his birthday, a military parade, and to show off. That's how they'll target that. And then, of course, the right wing will be targeted with, well, we need to show a strong showing for these factions out there, places like Iran, that we're not going to tolerate this and that. We have this military might and we will use it, and they need to come to the table for a deal, as Trump had told them, before there's nothing left of them. Do you see how insidious all of this is? It's rhetoric, and it's all tailor-made at this point via social media and via algorithm and data collection to the audience that's viewing it. They give you the skewed version that reifies your already pre-existent belief systems to support your worldview. That's what you will get in your custom, tailor-made news feeds on social media. You will get that which the algorithm thinks you want to see in regards to things going on in this world, and this is a type of weaponized rhetoric into and of itself. So keep that in mind. But let's continue reading in the document here. It says, the first sentence is a little strong, but it is not what killed the passage. It's the portion stating, quote, there is absolute unanimity in this regard, there is no opposition, end quote. Even if that's true in Israel, it doesn't play well anywhere else. We don't believe there is ever complete unanimity of anything, let alone important foreign policy questions and military action. And they're not wrong in that regard. I don't see absolute unanimity in anything like that, especially in regards to foreign policy and military action. But what we're seeing now is an escalation from the rhetorical to an actual militarized action. You see, the controllers of this world are panicking. They're seeing their ultimate grab at power as slipping away from their grasp. And they can't sit by idly. They have to try to do something to push up the timeline. They're running low on time. So this is what they've done. They see this as their absolute last resort. Militarily targeting nuclear facilities in Iran, and that's how they will frame it for you. It must be a preemptive thing now. Preemptive strike. A surgical strike. That's how they will frame it. That's what they want to do. That's how they want you to view it. This has been going on for a long time, all of this planning, and you can see it outlined here in no uncertain terms in this 2009 document titled The Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary. Chapter 5 tells you everything you need to know about things escalating right now. They feel they have to take action, that they can no longer go the route of sanctions or anything of that sort. They do not want Iran to have nuclear capabilities. They've told them so over and over again. And Iran still allegedly continues to pursue the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And therefore now they see it as their time to strike, to justify their action. And of course, if you want to get into the esoteric side of this and look at the astrological connections, they timed this to certain energetic principles in the sky clock. And I'm not an expert on all of that, but I'm sure there are others out there who will tell you what energies are at play and why it is that they chose this timing to do things. And I find it rather compelling that as all this stuff is kicking off right now, Bilderberg 2025 is going on this weekend. Kicked off yesterday, just prior to Israel attacking Iran, preemptively defending themselves from Iran. Do you know how ridiculous it sounds? But that's what they try to convince you is really going on. Now, here's the thing. I know a lot of Christians that are gung-ho pro-Israel. And I find that interesting on a lot of different levels. You see, in the Bible, the Jewish people are described as God's chosen people. But the political nation-state, the political Zionist nation-state that is Israel, should not be conflated with the Jewish people of the Bible. And yet Christians do this. Anything that they call Jewish or Israeli seems to get all painted with the same brush. Well, what is Jewish? How do you define what is a Jew? Is it a race? Is it a religion? Is it a nation? Is it a political movement? What is it? What does that mean? There are very blurred lines of distinction. Who are the Jews spoken of in the Bible? And who are the chosen people of God that are named in the Bible? Now, there's a lot of Christian theologians that lean more towards the explanation that God's chosen people are now the church, because the Jewish people rejected the Messiah. And now it's the church has been engrafted in, and that it's anybody that accepts Jesus Christ as Savior. These are God's chosen people, not just a particular race or racial stock. If you actually study these things, you find a lot of concerning things surrounding this conflating of the nation-state, the Zionist nation-state of Israel in the modern era, with God's chosen people in the Bible. And maybe there is a portion of that, but it is not this governmental organization that is the government of the nation-state, the Zionist nation-state of Israel, that is unleashing this stuff on the world, or defending itself from this stuff on the world. You see, a lot of things, in my view, have been misinterpreted in the Bible by a lot of well-meaning Christians. And I'm not saying we shouldn't support the people of Israel. We most certainly should. But we should also support the people of other nations around the world as well. You see, we're all pretty much the same. We all want the same things. Your average person just wants to be left alone, to be able to live their life comfortably without any threat by others. And this is the thing, it's the governments of the world and these non-governmental organizations that stir up dissent that are the ones that cause the escalation of these types of things. It's all very nefarious, really, at the heart of it all. Stirring up these tensions based upon people's religious beliefs, based upon their nationalist beliefs. It's really a sad state of affairs, and I hate to see it going on. And the saddest part is the vast majority of the Iranian people, the government doesn't represent them. Just like everywhere else in the world, our government here in the United States no longer represents the people. Let's put it that way. Your average citizen is not represented by our government officials and the things they do with the power we've given them. But the sad portion is we've been socially engineered to just be passive about all of it, to just accept what they do. We've given away our sovereignty. We've given away our responsibility. We've given away, well, basically, a lot of how we conduct ourselves to these people that we supposedly elect into office. And the people we elect into office aren't the ones calling the shots. That's the important thing to understand here. It's these non-governmental organizations, these NGOs, that have sway and influence with people within governments. Use a lot of lobbying money to get things done. It's a sad state of affairs, really. And I don't have the answers to this. I just look and I shake my head at what's happening in this world because I do find it massively concerning. And there's people that just fall for the rhetoric over and over and over. How does this benefit us here in America? How does being involved in another conflict like this in the Middle East, how does this benefit us in any way, shape, or form? It's just steering us headlong into more conflict, more chaos. That's what these people are about. They have to instigate chaos because they have a plan to instantiate order out of chaos. That's their calling card. That's what they do. It's what the New World Order is all about. They have ready-made solutions for all of this, but first, before you can build the New World Order, you have to burn the Old World Order to the ground. And then the phoenix will rise from the ashes. These people are the philosophers of fire, after all, and that is what they promulgate. So we're seeing an escalation happening in things today. So what can we do? Well, we can express our opinions. We can share information like this with one another. And we can pray. And I would advise, get your heart and your mind and your soul right with God. Because these things will not stand. You see, it's all coming to a head. And it's not going to be tolerated much longer. The natural order of things does not uphold these types of actions or these types of events occurring. Natural law does what natural law does. And these things will be rejected outright by the natural world itself, if not by the people. But there is hope. There's always hope. By understanding the machinations of what's going on, what's really going on behind the scenes, maybe we could put a stop to this kind of thing. I don't like seeing any of this stuff going on. I really don't. Nor does anybody in their right mind. But yet you have all of these pro-war, pro-military, hardline extremists in governments out there that are really applauding this. They really think it's for the best. There's a lot of well-meaning people that get caught up in this. And I understand, I could see both sides of the argument. Yes, if somebody is an actual threat to you, you don't like to be threatened. So you do have the right to defend yourself. But is preemptive self-defense really a thing? Is Iran really proliferating nuclear materials to build nuclear weapons? They've been working on this for the better part of 40 years, allegedly. And these same concerns were raised back in the 1980s about Iran. It's the same old playbook over and over and over again. But now they're actually taking actions upon this in a real militarized fashion. And that's the part that I find massively concerning. They don't care about the people. It has nothing to do with the people. It's all about flexing and positioning their power. It's infighting at the topmost levels of the controllers of this world. That's what it is. Who's going to get to call the shots? Who's going to usher in the technotronic era? Who's going to lead that? It's infighting at the highest, most levels. And these political figures we see, they are all just puppets on a string that are representing the true powers of this world. The ones that call the shots. It's all political theater, ladies and gentlemen. There are other agendas at play and ulterior motives. I don't claim to know all the answers. I don't have all the answers as to the how or why they want to do these certain things or why the timing of it all like it is. But I do know that what you see on your television set and what you see come across social media is far from the truth of the matter. It's all weaponized rhetoric to get you to accept what it is they're trying to hand you. And it always invariably ends with the taking away of more and more of your freedoms and your human rights and the fruits of your labor. And at this point, it's all about setting up this technocratic control grid. That's what this will ultimately culminate in. They want to be able to have an electronic database of identification of every individual in the world. They want to track every individual in the world from cradle to grave. And if they can't get that done in a reasonable enough time frame and fashion for them, they have no compunction with depopulating the world. In fact, if you look at the Bilderberg agenda, this weekend, they're meeting right now. They began meeting on Friday. They're meeting right now for the remainder of the weekend. And one of the things they're talking about is depopulation and migration on their own website, on Bilderberg's website, which, by the way, Bilderberg, that was all a conspiracy theory up until about, 2013 or 2014, when they finally admitted to their existence publicly, and they've been meeting every year since 1954 in secret and denied the existence of this organization until such a point that they could not deny it anymore because enough people were watching them and asking questions. So now they admit openly it exists. They have their own website. They tell you the things they're talking about and who's in attendance. By the way, people in attendance at Bilderberg today are Peter Thiel, among other tech moguls that are present there, and a lot of other important people from different organizations around the world, tech firms and media outlets and governments around the world. Interesting, to say the least. But there's a lot of artificial intelligence guys there this weekend as well, because that's what this is ultimately intended to culminate in. The building of a massive database to track and monitor every person in the world in real time, from cradle to grave, right down to biometric information, genomic information, everything, every bit of metadata on you in one centralized utility based on a blockchain ledger wherein no information will ever be lost. They're building the beast system. That's what they want to bring into fruition as a result of all of this. This will be their ultimate justification. Well, in order to prevent terrorism, we need to be able to monitor and track people 24/7. We need surveillance. We need that surveillance capability. A lot of this will be provided by companies like Palantir, which the original intention today was to actually do a broadcast talking about Palantir and its history and how it has compiled all of this data on individuals in this world into a centralized utility and has been working with military intelligence to do so, and domestically here in the U.S. as well. But we'll get to that broadcast at some other time. This takes precedent. I think this is urgent in light of things we see happening in the world. I just want people to be aware. This wasn't sudden or unexpected. They've been planning this for a long time. They were just trying to leverage things the right way for themselves. They wanted to use the timing in an appropriate fashion, so they could justify their actions and also have people distracted with other things while it's going on. It's all about the reign of confusion. Chaos. Orchestrate chaos, and then institute order out of that chaos. That's their primary operational method. So how they do that? By weaponizing rhetoric against the people to condition them to accept something like this as a reasonable solution to a contrived problem. Now, maybe there is a real problem with Iran developing nuclear capabilities. I don't know. I don't know enough about geopolitics to really formulate an opinion based on just that alone. I just know what's available out there in the public for all of us to peruse, and we've all been hearing things about Iran for a very long time. But is it true, or is it propaganda? That's a lot of the problem. We get one side of the story all the time. And that's the nature of how this works. That's why organizations like this Israel Project, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that's how they do things. They infiltrate into media and they formulate public opinion through weaponized rhetoric. That's exactly what we've seen here. And what's the outcome of weaponized rhetoric? Well, it allows many people to not only accept something like this, preemptive self-defense of a nation, but a lot of people cheer it on. You got to stop those bad guys. It's sad. There's no good that comes from war or rumors of war. We were taught about this. We were told about this in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he told us, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. Well, we're seeing all kinds of things like this, aren't we? That's how you can know the season you're in. He tells us the parable of the fig tree. Are you familiar with the parable of the fig tree? When you see the blossoms on the fig tree starting to open and the fruits are beginning to form, it means summer is nigh. That means it's springtime, and summer is inevitably coming very soon. He says, when you see these things happening, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, know that the second advent is nigh. It is at hand. It is very near. That is why I advise you, get your hearts and your minds and your souls right with God. We can have that right stance once again with God. He made the way for us where there was none, and it is a free gift, and a lot of people will very much try to overcomplicate the message that Christ gave us. We need only accept Him and His gift that He gave us and profess with our mouth that He is Savior and believe in our hearts. And then we too can be right with God. And then you don't have to worry about all of these things coming to fruition around us. Then you can look up, for your redemption draweth nigh. That's what we can know. We will be redeemed through all of this, ladies and gentlemen. This too shall pass. We can have a better world. The problem is we can't let these dark forces that are really running things get the better of us, and that's why it's important, more so now than ever, that we have that right relationship with God, that we can endure unto the end. We don't need to get caught up in the fear of all of it. You need no fear. You need to just have that right standing, and you can endure to the end. Be not afraid, for all these things must come to pass. But it will be a short time, and this too shall pass, and we can emerge on the other side in a better state than we are now. But at any rate, we can't let these manipulators at the top of the power structure in this world dictate to us how this stuff can go. We can still change things. We need to say enough. We do not accept or tolerate your infractions upon others in this world. We cannot tolerate this any longer. We need to have peace. Peace on earth, peace between all people, because this cannot sustain itself. You see, the military-industrial complex and the banking cartels have steered and directed things for far too long, And this very small interest group at the topmost levels of the power structure in this world, they do not represent the rest of us. They only represent their own greedy self-interests, and it needs to stop. We need to no longer tolerate this and remove our consent from this kind of a thing by being vocal about it, by telling them we're on to their games. We know, all the peoples of the world know. I'm tired of seeing innocent people suffer because of the greedy desires of a select few at the top of the power structure in this world. That's what it ultimately comes down to. There's very few people calling the shots with this stuff, and they don't represent the best interests of the rest of us. We need to realize that. We need to expose that. We need to accept that our governments do not represent our best interests. They're parasites. They constitute what you might call a breakaway civilization, many at the topmost levels of the power structure of this world, and they have ulterior motives than those that we have. They have a different set of values than we have, and they don't have our best interests at mind. They vampirize our energy and our labor against us to achieve the things they want to achieve. And we need to remove our consent from that. And this is just an example of one of those things that they do, how they weaponize rhetoric and language against us to get us to accept these things that they want to do and justify their actions. And in so doing, they engineer the consent of the masses. Do not consent. Do not let them engineer your consent to this kind of thing, because this type of escalation is only going to lead to more suffering in more places around the world. So even though it seems more like a regional conflict, it's going to have worldwide ramifications, and they know this. They count on it, in fact. We're living in very interesting times. That's for certain. But we need to be aware of the tools they use against us and who really calls the shots. A lot of it has to do with these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and how they have used weaponized rhetoric and language against us, and scarcely people even understand it. This is all part of the social engineering that's gone on. It's all about engineering not only consent, but complacency in the masses. And largely that's where we're at. Anyway, I hope this was eye-opening for you. I hope you understand a little better some of the agendas quietly going on in the background. And I hope you could reasonably have a little more context into what's going on in the world as a result of this. And this is all outlined in their own words, in their own documents, that they never intended the public to find, but here we have it. And was this leaked on purpose? Maybe. This is a type of revelation of the method. They like to tell you what they're going to do. They just can't help it that you didn't bother to read it. So maybe they didn't intend for this to get out to the public, but somehow it got leaked, so they were like, okay, we'll be good with it being leaked, because that way people will know what we have in mind when it ultimately eventually comes to pass some 16 years later. And here we are. Here we sit, looking at the precipice of what many would call World War III. I would like to remind you, I think we've been firmly entrenched in World War III since 1954, ever since that very first Bilderberg meeting. This has been called the Quiet War. Using silent weapons. Weaponized rhetoric is one of those silent weapons to engineer the consent of the masses. It's a type of domestic warfare that reaches beyond the bounds of what we would consider traditional warfare. This is what Jesus described as rumors of wars. It's a different type of warfare. Something entirely different than what we've been accustomed to as war through the course of history. And you're seeing it unfold before your eyes in real time. So I want to leave on a positive note. I have extreme hope that people are beginning to wake up to a lot of this rhetoric that's gone on and are now rejecting this rhetoric. Whereas in the past, a few short years ago, they would have readily accepted this rhetoric as justification for action. I think there's a lot of people that are beginning to see the nuance through all of this and are beginning to question things on a more fundamental level, and that is good. And in that, I find extreme hope. We're seeing through the facade, the political theater, and understanding there are other motives at play. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you, I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.